All right, everybody, here we go with part 2 of chapter 1. So part 1, we really talked about communication and language. Now we're going to talk about speech. Speech is a neuromuscular process that allows us to express language vocally. It's the precise activation of muscles in the respiration, phonation, and articulation systems to transmit language. The building blocks of effective speech are respiration, voice, articulation, and fluency, and we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about each one. All right, respiration or breath stream. Speech always begins at exhalation, so we inhale just to get air in, and then if we're speaking, we always speak when we're exhaling. An inability to produce or maintain a strong breath stream can result in disordered speech. So people who've had a stroke or people who have had ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, where their muscles really start to break down and stop working, they may have a very hard time breathing enough to put enough words together so that it sounds fluent and easy to understand. Voice quality is really important. So a breathy voice, which could be something like this. If I have a paralyzed vocal fold and I can't bring my vocal folds together to make sound, I'm going to talk like that. A hoarse voice, broken, nasal, etc. Voice can impact communication and comfort of the speaker. And it's really important because if we have a voice patient, we're going to almost always refer them out to see an ENT, an ear, nose, and throat doctor first, just to make sure that there's nothing physically wrong, that there's no throat cancer going on or anything not working before we start doing any kind of therapy with them. Loudness or intensity and pitch and frequency can also be important. Is the person able to be as loud as they want to? Are they able to, move easily from quiet to loud and back and forth so that their voice isn't sounding so monotone that they're always the same loudness the whole time? And then the pitch or frequency are also important. Is the person speaking at the pitch that they want to speak at? Do they have a higher pitch than they want, a lower pitch than they would like? And can we help them with that? Articulation is the movement of the speech mechanism to produce the sounds of speech. Structures such as the soft palate, tongue, and lips create the sounds of speech. So my 4-year-old right now has a little bit of a tongue thrust. I'll have to take some video for you when we talk about the articulation section of the book, where he'll make sounds that sound like that, where he kind of takes his tongue and moves it forward to make more of a TH when he means to make an S. So he's not articulating his sounds the way, the typical adult would. He's just turned 4, not really thinking about it too much yet, or not thinking, but if he, becomes 4.5 and 5, and he's still sticking out that tongue when he's making that nice S sound, we may start to just kind of give him some ideas about how to keep his tongue in his mouth when making that good S. So it's articulation is just the way that sounds are produced. Fluency is putting it all together. So taking the respiration, the voicing, the articulation, it's got to be all together, all timed correctly. And the idea of fluency is that it's people's speech is as easy, smooth, flowing, and effortless as it can be for that person. And continuity and speech rate can be important. So things like hesitations, interjections, right? Ums and uhs, repetitions, prolongations, right? If they're an issue, helping people to have fewer of them, speaking more comfortably. And one thing I like to tell parents, whether it's a language issue, a speech issue, a stuttering issue, which would be fluency and putting it all together, is just, the complexity of speech, and that we're taking a thought, we're turning that thought into language, we're then turning that language into a speech plan where we're going to put each letter or each sound we've got to make, and we've got to time that all perfectly for all the words and sentences, and just how complicated that is. And it's totally normal that a certain percentage of people are going to have a harder time with their articulation, with their fluency, with their language skills, because these are very complicated processes. It's very normal that some people will struggle with them. All right, then we've got a little bit on hearing or audition. And hearing is the perception of sound, right? And this is one half of speech communication. If people can't hear when you're speaking, you're not really communicating. So hearing involves, number one, just the awareness of sound. So, right, I'm aware that a sound is being made, and then the ability to distinguish among sounds, so I could hear the difference between a D and a T and a B and a P, and then the ability to process the sound rapidly, and to start to make sense of that sound. And this, certainly plays into acoustics, so that if you go on and major in communication disorders and are interested in either audiology or speech language pathology, you're going to take some speech and hearing science classes. So looking at the study of sound, how does sound get from one place to another, right? So a sound source vibration, so if someone's playing the drums, that vibration point would be the drum. But if we're speaking, right, it's our vocal folds. Our vocal folds in our throat are going to actually vibrate together. That sound then will get shaped in our mouth, and then will go out into the air. That vibration will then start vibrating the air particles. That vibration will then be received by the ear, and then it goes into the inner ear, up the auditory nerve, into the brain, where it gets comprehended by the brain. All right, so, and as we went through, we kind of talked about communication disorders a little bit, but let's kind of talk about them a little bit more. So we've got the idea of normal communication, right? And I put that in quotes. That can be a very broad thing, and depending on what culture you're in and how old the person is, that'll sort of give us the idea of normal. And we can also have the discussion of is normal important anyway, but that's a whole nother discussion that we'll have later. So you can have the idea of normal communication, you've got communication disorders, and then you've got communication differences. So people that communicate well, but maybe in a different way for their culture. So if you've got people that have a dialect, or either speaking African American English or Creole or whatever, and they're in a place where there's just sort of the predominantly middle America white English, right? It might come across as being unusual, or the person might have a hard time understanding them, but that has nothing to do with, it's certainly not even close to being a disorder. It's just a different way of communicating. So just being really aware of, and that those kids, those first graders might have a hard time in school at the beginning, where, they're used to talking one way at home, and then they get to school, which is sort of in general American English, and that's sort of a completely different dialect to what they're used to, and they just have to get used to that for a little while. So it's certainly not a disorder, but a difference instead. So normal communication, we've got great variability, highly influenced by culture, language, geography, economics, religion, ethnicity, race, sexual identity, etc., etc. That's sort of the idea of neurotypical, right? If you've heard that expression before, the idea of sort of how the average person thinks, how the average person uses language, how the average person speaks, right? But that's not necessarily the right way to talk or think or speak or use language. It's just sort of the typical way to do it, right? A communication disorder is where somebody has significant difficulty in one or more of formulation, right? So I don't have the thought, or I don't have the language, the transmission, so I'm not able to produce the speech in order to get that thought to another person. The person doesn't have the reception, so they're not able to hear the thought well enough, or comprehension, so I can hear you, but I can't put together what you're saying. And that, in at least one of these areas, and it must adversely impact school, work, home, social, and or life in their community. All right, language disorders impacts one or more of those 5 areas we talked about: semantics, syntax, morphology, phonology, pragmatics. And this can be kids, adults, reading, speaking, writing, signing, etc., etc. So you can have language issues really at, almost any age, for any number of reasons. That can just be a, sort of a developmental language disorder that's there with the person. It can be somebody that, later in life had a car accident, a stroke, anything else, a disease, a tumor, and it's going to impact their language. Speech disorders. You've got speech sound disorders with articulation and phonology, and in a little bit we'll start diving into the difference between the two. We've got fluency disorders, stuttering and cluttering, voice disorders, motor speech disorders, and sort of neurogenic speech disorders. So this will be sort of the last, or not really the last half, but the last maybe 3/4 of the class will be diving into these disorders and what are the disorders and how do we assess and treat these speech disorders. The last 2 chapters of the book are going to take on hearing disorders. So you can have sensory neural hearing loss, which is an inner ear or auditory nerve difficulty. You can have a conductive hearing loss, which is going to be an outer or middle ear difficulty. And you can also have a mixed hearing loss, which is sensory neural and conductive. Or you can also have an auditory processing disorder, which is a difficulty processing the speech sounds. So you can hear everything. The speech sounds just don't make sense when you hear them. And then also, speech language pathologists in hospitals also deal with feeding and swallowing issues. So working with infants having a hard time eating and getting food in, children in the schools, or again, older adults who might have feeding and swallowing disorders, usually again from the result of some kind of an accident or stroke or tumor or something like that. So the cool thing about our field is, we're working with all ages of people in all different kinds of settings is pretty amazing. Communication disorders can lead to social and emotional isolation and can create serious personal, social, educational, and occupational difficulties for an individual. So remember the very first slide of part 1. I asked you to think about, how would your life be different if you did or did not have a communication disorder? Do you think you'd be more likely to withdraw or avoid situations, or maybe feel like you weren't able to do certain jobs, or, do certain things? And, what would that mean? And would you be strong enough to work your way out of that and to figure out how to live your best life? All right, so now last section here, chapter 1, we're going to talk about careers in communication disorders. Our professional organization for audiologists and speech language pathologists is ASHA, the American Speech Language Hearing Association, and they're at www.asha.org. You might want to check them out and just kind of look over there. They have a huge website with all kinds of information about our field. So speech-language pathology is concerned with the study and understanding of human communication and swallowing, their disorders, and the assessment and treatment of those disorders. Someone who is an accredited speech-language pathologist has what we call their C's, which means they have a master's degree from an accredited program. We are an accredited master's program here at Appalachian State. You then have to pass a national certification exam, and then you have to work for 9 months and be mentored. So it's work, you have a job, you're paid, but you have somebody who already has their C's, is already a certified SLP, who is your mentor, who has to check in on you monthly, make sure everything's going well, has to come watch you a couple times. So you do a clinical fellowship year, your CFY, working under the supervision of a certified SLP, and then when you complete all that, you apply to get your certificate of clinical competence. So people will call that your C's, and you're a CCC SLP, you've got your certificate of clinical competence in speech-language pathology. Right now, there are about 172,000 practicing speech-language pathologists in the U.S. Over 50,000 of us work in the public schools, but there are also SLPs in healthcare facilities, colleges and universities, and private practice. So you can kind of work anywhere, do anything with any number of people, which is pretty cool. Audiology is concerned with the study and understanding of normal and disordered hearing and the rehabilitation of individuals with hearing impairments. To be an audiologist, to get your C's, your CCCA, you've got to get a doctoral degree, either an AUD, PhD, or PsyD, is the entry-level degree for audiologists. So your AUD is actually a 3-year master's program. So to get your speech-language pathology master's, it's a 2-year program. It's usually a 5-semester, a fall, spring, summer, fall, spring program. For audiology, you add an extra year on that and get your AUD, is the entry-level degree to become an audiologist. You've got to do a national certification exam, and you've got to do a clinical fellowship year. So pretty similar, at just 1 extra year of schooling to be an audiologist. There are about 13,000 audiologists or members of ASHA. There are a few more audiologists, though, that are not members of ASHA. Over 70% of audiologists work in a healthcare facility, hospitals, clinics, doctors' offices, private practices, but they're also working in the school systems, industries, and colleges and universities. And just kind of to finish up here, we have a real diversity problem in our field. Members of ASHA are about 95% female and 92% white. And that certainly does not reflect our client base. So we really need a more diverse profession that reflects the diversity of our clients. So if you are somebody who's not on that list, who's not female and not white, we more than encourage you to apply. And if you are female and white, we more than encourage you to apply and become a communication disorder specialist. But if you have any friends who are underrepresented in any way, we really encourage you to encourage them to apply, and we welcome and need a much more diverse number of colleagues. So that ends our chapter 1.